I wasn't skeptical, but I had kind of lost hope. So it was about rebuilding that hope. So it wasn't that I was skeptical of the individual's abilities to help or kind of what the theory was behind it, but it's just when you're told by so-called experts that, there's nothing more that you can do, I had lost hope that there was any way out.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Burnt Chef Journal, a hospitality-focused podcast dedicated to smashing the stigma of mental health and inspiring people to create change within their lives and organisations for a happier and healthier hospitality profession. I'm joined this week by Julie Pilcher, who runs Vegas Wellbeing, a company focused on boosting health and well-being by focusing on mind and nutrition. She talks to us about the importance of nutrition and actually how eating the right foods can have such a profound and beneficial impact on our overall health and well-being. There are some key takeaways from this particular episode, certainly things that we can introduce into the working world as well as into our personal lives. And as always, I hope that you enjoy this week's episode. So today on this week's episode, I'm joined by Julie from Vegas Wellbeing. Julie, hi.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm really good, Chris. Thank you very much for inviting me onto your podcast.
No, you're totally welcome. Totally welcome. Thank you for getting in contact. I know that we're going to be speaking offline about continuing this conversation in terms of what we can provide and give out to our audience and what can benefit them. But for me as well as the people listening, I don't know much about Vegas Wellbeing. I don't know much about yourself, and I'd love to learn more. So, how did you get into this particular subject matter in this business?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So my background is very different. So I spent 23 years in marine insurance. That climbing the corporate ladder, traveling, crazy lifestyle, very intense. And for a long time, I really enjoyed it. But it was coupled with some ill health. So 11 years ago, I was diagnosed with cervical cancer. And I was very lucky in that they caught it early. I only had surgery. I didn't need chemo or radio. So, it could have been a lot worse. But it did leave a lasting legacy of pain and scarring in my body. And also some gynae issues. So, to do with the reproductive tract, there was some other things going on as well. So trying to deal with ill health, 2 small children, and a very intense job took its toll. Over time, it wasn't I think that's a lot of people's stories, is that there's not this immediate breakdown, but it happens over time. And it certainly did, the stress of the job wasn't helping. Anyway, to try and build the story up, I saw a nutritional therapist, I saw a personal trainer, and I went and used mindfulness meditation. And the combination of those 3 support systems completely transformed my life. At a point where the NHS had completely wrote me off, I was living in chronic pain on lots of medication, and it was medically undiagnosed. They said, we can't help you. But I'm quite stubborn, and I just wasn't prepared to accept that. I wasn't 40 at that point, and I wasn't prepared to live the rest of my life like that. So went off and, got some personal help with these amazing therapists. But when I started to see the impact that was having on my body, I could no longer ignore that information. So I decided to retrain in nutritional therapy. It was just so powerful. And it also reignited a passion for nutrition that had always been there. So when I was 18, finishing A-levels, I realised slightly too late that I would have liked to have been a dietitian. but hadn't chose the science subjects. This was pre-internet, where you had to write off for information about courses from university. And I don't think anybody at 18 wants to go and resit GCSEs and A-levels and do it all again. So kind of that moment passed me by. But once I started to discover this information, it was like, oh, well, this has always been simmering in the background, and it was just too much to ignore.
No, and I appreciate that, and thank you for sharing as well. I mean, my mum at the moment in time is going through chemotherapy for breast cancer, and unfortunately, we lost my mother-in-law 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago now. So yeah, it's I understand the not necessarily firsthand, but the impact that it can have on you, and obviously, the support network around you as well. I'm curious, when you started searching for nutritional and personal trainer and mindfulness, were these things that you already knew and understood potentially could have a positive impact, or was it sort of like a last hope, if you like, in terms of the fact that the NHS has said, well, we can't figure it out, we have no clue, you're on your own? How did you come to these sort of options?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was something I knew about at the time of NHS treatment. I wish I knew about them earlier, for sure. So I think it was really just the internet and searching and picking up books and discovering for myself that these alternative therapies were out there. And particularly in relation to, I know this is slightly going off topic, but with the personal training, I mention it because what's really important to me and what ties into the business name is the mind-body connection. And because my body had let me down, it was broken in some way, I had completely divorced myself from my own body. And that might sound strange to someone who hasn't gone through an illness. But, I physically didn't recognize myself. So I remember, at the first time going to see the personal trainer, and, I started to put on weight, was getting out of breath, walking around, because a lot of, lying around, living on painkillers, you're losing your physical strength. And I remember not him even allow, I didn't want him to even touch my body, and that, I'm not in terms of showing me movements and that kind of thing, and being just so removed from what my body was capable of. And it's the power of reconnecting with that, because when you're in pain, whether that's mental or physical, the tendency is to push it away or bury it, or, just somehow ignore it. But that only makes it bigger, both in the mind and the body. And we need to somehow become in tune with it and recognize and become aware of it to start to heal.
So it's an unseen physical and psychological trauma, I guess, in a way, isn't it? Like if you don't acknowledge it and start to try and process it, it's just going to fester, like a cancer, if you like.
Yeah, it just gets bigger. The more you ignore something, the bigger it gets. And I'm in the process of doing some work on pain with some psychologists, and that therapy, nutrition, I'm very aware is one tool in the toolbox. And perhaps we'll come on to why that is in relation to mental health later on. But, it's about giving people the choice of tools to help themselves. Nutrition isn't going to be the answer for everybody, but what tools are, what speaks to them to help them get better.
Yeah, and there is no one size fits all, is there? And that's the thing with this, and it's the same with diets and exercise and all of this other thing. What works for one individual may not work for another, in the same way that a supportive structure for one individual may not work for another person. And it's getting to understand exactly what your brain, your body needs in order to be able to perform at its highest levels, which is quite interesting. So, I mean, your perception running into this was all, you'd found it on the internet. it was all relatively new to you. Were you quite skeptical at the beginning in terms of what the result or what the output would be?
I wasn't skeptical, but I had kind of lost hope. So it was about rebuilding that hope. So it wasn't that I was skeptical of the individual's abilities to help or kind of what the theory was behind it, but it's just when you're told by so-called experts that, there's nothing more that you can do, I had lost hope that there was any way out, which is kind of, why when I learned about the Burnt Chef project and the fantastic work you're trying to do is, one of the messages I want to give to your listeners is one of hope that there is always something else to try.
Amazing, and we'll be exploring more of that throughout our conversation. I'm first and foremost, I'm intrigued. Vegas Wellbeing. Firstly, what is Vegas? What's the term? And we're not talking about casinos. It's VAGUS, but what is Vegas and why Vegas Wellbeing?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So vagus is a nerve that runs from our brainstem, so the back of our heads, all the way through our torso, so to our heart, lungs, digestive tract, liver, gallbladder, all the organs that we have in our body. And it is the major component of our parasympathetic nervous system. So we have two nervous systems of the autonomic, so automatic nerves. So if you think about breathing, your heart rate, when you need to use the bathroom, these are all automatic processes in the body. We don't have to consciously think to breathe. But we have two branches, sympathetic, so our fight or flight nervous system, and parasympathetic, which is our rest and digest nervous system. And in Western lifestyle, we spend too long in fight or flight and not enough in rest and digest. So vagus is, it's the motorway, if you like, between our organs and our brain for the rest and digest part. So if our vagal tone is strong, then we are more able to relax and encourage this balance of the nervous systems in the body.
Interesting. Yeah. So in terms of there's so many questions off the back of that. First and foremost, how do you get your vagus nervous and your parasympathetic nervous system to just change its state? Like how's that possible, especially for hospitality individuals who are working longer hours and with high demands and pressures?
Yeah, so there's lots you can do to improve your vagal tone. The first thing is breathing, which sounds really obvious, but it isn't, because we can spend a lot of time in a stress state breathing at the top of our lungs and not all the way down into our belly. So this is where things like mindfulness, yoga come in, because they can encourage that deep, longer breath in the body. So just by having longer breaths and deeper breaths and making the out breath longer than the in breath, then that in itself, it stimulates the vagus nerve. And then things like gargling. So if you want to gargle some water after you've brushed your teeth, or the gag reflex. So when you've brushed your teeth, touching the back of the soft palate in your mouth, and that stimulates the vagus nerve because it runs down our neck. So it's all about touching it and, giving it some stimulation. Cold showers. So cold therapy is really stimulatory. It's not one for me personally, but cold water swimming is massively taking off here in the Northeast where it's freezing cold. But every day there's swimmers out there. Humming. So, when you I don't know if you talk to yoga teachers, but that sometimes they might use that. That just stimulates the nerve as well. And then things like acupuncture. So needles, particularly in our ear, or in the middle of our ear. So needles can stimulate certain areas, and even, massage, chiropractic treatments. So there's lots of physical ways you can stimulate the vagus nerve. But, to keep it simple for your listeners, I would just encourage that deeper breathing.
Yeah, which is something that we talk about through our training sessions in terms of checking in with ourselves, almost like a body scan. When was the last time that any of us took a deep breath? And probably now with the listeners and even myself included are like, oh yeah, I need to breathe deeply. But we are always in this sort of panicked, heightened state whereby you're always on red alert mode. And the more that I look into this and the more we look at stress mitigation and we're training teams about how we reduce stress within workplaces, the more I'm starting to find more and more causes of stress. And it's becoming a constant battle. Like, even just investigating the other day about the impacts of notifications on the phone and how they spike your dopamine levels and put you in a high state of arousal, but then they're increasing your stress response. And it means that you're constantly being bombarded with little, like, tiny jolts of stress. So that in itself is huge. I mean, is for anyone looking at monitoring their breathing, do they have to set a reminder on their calendar? Is this something that they have to sort of be quite acutely aware of? Because this isn't something that's in with our normal habit at this moment in time.
I think it's about what works for the individual. So for some people, just setting an alarm for 2 minutes. So, if you're busy, even doing 2 minutes can help to bring our stress levels down. Some people prefer an app, to help guide them. It depends on how much time people think they can give and when it's going to work in their lifestyle. So I would never tell anyone. It's always a conversation and a very collaborative approach, and asking clients what's going to work for them, inviting them to come up with solutions. That's going to be more motivational than me ever telling someone what to do.
Yeah. And perhaps if there's anyone out there listening about how they can implement this into team structures, this could be a post or pre-service team activity. Or even, when you probably need it the most is slap bang in the middle of service. Mm-hmm. 2 minutes of deep breathing as a team to put a circuit breaker in place could be tremendous in terms of people's well-being and their ability to perform. Yeah. The pennies just dropped for me there, so thank you for that. And so the vagus nerve is attached to the digestive system, and obviously the digestive system must have a huge part to play in recovery from illnesses and overall health and well-being. I know that serotonin is predominantly produced in the gut. I think over 90%, but I could be medically mistaken. It's more general knowledge, but how does our overall gut health and what we eat impact our overall health and well-being in terms of illness and thriving?
That's a great question. Thanks, Chris. And it's a complicated one, but I'll try and keep it simple. There's lots going on in the gut. And from the gut, I mean from your stomach all the way through to the other end. There's lots of different compartments. And I'll try and list the sort of body systems. That's how we work, looking at the body systems and where there's dysfunction. So you've got our hormones as a starting point. So our hunger and satiety hormones, when do we feel full and when do we, so that can be disrupted. We make insulin, which transports our food around the body for energy. We've got cortisol. So cortisol is a stress hormone, which will have systemic effects on the gut and elsewhere. We've got the immune system. So 70% of our immune system is in the gut. And that for me is quite intuitive, because after our skin, it's the biggest interface with the outside world. So every time we swallow something, the immune system has to check whether that's friend or foe. So does that food have salmonella? Is there some kind of bacteria that's going to cause a problem? So it's constantly surveilling what we're eating and making sure it's okay, not going to do us any harm. So because of that, if the gut's not functioning well, that can have quite systemic effects on our immune system, which also affects the brain. So the immune system produces messengers, like little communication signals, that cross the blood-brain barrier and cause inflammation in the brain, like a high alert, like the fire alarm going off. So the microglia are our brain immune cells, and they start firing off saying there's a problem, there's a problem. And if you do that, if that is, chronic, the immune system, what we call chronic low-grade inflammation, because the gut's not well and the immune system's on alert, then that can result in things like brain fog, brain shrinkage, obviously mood disorders, anxiety, depression. So what we want to try and do is bring inflammation down in the gut, which will have a positive impact on the brain. And another huge area is the microbiome. So I'm not sure if you've had any people talk about that yet on your podcast, but our gut bacteria have a huge influence on all of our on our health. So we've got 2 kilos of bacteria. We've got the same amount of cells in our bacteria as we have in the human body. It's huge. And the gut bacteria essentially talk to all the other immune body systems. So they talk to our immune cells, our hormones, our neurotransmitters, and they give a little bit of, this is the lay of the land. Things are okay or they're not okay. So looking after our gut bacteria is really important for our general health.
I mean, we see it on adverts, don't we, for things like Yakult about drinking some unknown substance, which apparently is meant to be good for you, but you never really pay that much attention to these sort of things. And so I'm curious, like, I don't know, how do we check what state our gut bacteria is in, our microbiome, and how do we, if it's in a poor state, look at trying to improve it? And where do you even begin?
You can test your stools to see what your gut microbiome is doing, but you don't need to do that. I think, you can assess your gut by yourself. So, do you have any pain, any bloating? Are you going to the toilet every day? So constipation is a big problem in the UK. Some people go every other day, and that's constipation. And if you are suffering with that, then that causes a buildup of toxins in the body because you're not excreting what we need to. But similarly, diarrhea is, we're not getting nutrients. So the food is passing too fast through the gut and being eliminated before we get the chance to get the nutrients from it. So I think, we're all intuitive enough to recognize if the gut is functioning well. If you've had a heavy night or you drink, you've been drinking alcohol, your gut doesn't feel as good as it perhaps could. But the simplest way to look after this gut bacteria is to feed it. So it loves prebiotics. So what you see in the yogurts and the little drinks are probiotics. So they are live bacteria that you're supplementing. But prebiotics are feeding our own. And what they love is variety. So, whilst I practice personalized nutrition, one of the kind of golden rules I could tell anybody is to try and increase your variety. So aim for 30 plants a week. So that sounds like a lot, but when you include fruit, vegetables, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, then you can think, well, it's a bit easier to get to 30. So the variety of different fibers in our plant food gives that nice broad spectrum to ensure that we have some nice positive strains of bacteria.
Interesting. And so to when I talk about the subject of mental health and well-being, I often walk us back through time, back to when we were roaming the plains of Africa as Neanderthals, and try to simplify our biology and our genetic makeup back then, and how complicated and strange the world has got. So I'm intrigued. I know there's this whole sort of plant-based revolution going on at the moment, some for health reasons, some for environmental reasons. Were we grazing more off of plants than meat, and is meat inherently bad for us and in our diets, or is it everything in moderation? How does that work?
Yes, we were eating a lot more plants in terms of the variety, and obviously a lot of our plant foods now are genetically grown. So, for example, a broccoli didn't exist on the savannah. It's been bred, and different plants have been put together to get the foods that we've got now. So when you hear of things like the paleo diet, it's kind of none of the foods in the paleo, when we were like hunter-gatherers, exist anymore. But the principle is just to encourage more natural whole foods. I know obviously vegan, vegetarian is really popular now. And that's a very personal choice, like you say, for not just for physical reasons, ethical as well. I'm a meat eater, but I would always respect other people's choices. It's about getting the nutrients that we need. So you can, in theory, get enough protein, vitamins, and minerals, with the exception of a couple, from a vegetarian and vegan diet, but it needs to be well planned. So, for example, protein. Obviously, we get a lot of protein from animal products, or meat, fish, dairy. Then we're going to have to eat a lot more plant food to get the same amount of protein. Beans, lentils, that kind of thing. And then, with vegetarian and vegan diets, they are at risk of things like iron deficiency, which we get from red meat. It's very rich in iron. And B12. So B12 only comes from animal products, and it's very important for the brain, actually. It's one of the key nutrients for good brain health, to build the neurotransmitters and allow good communication between brain cells. So you can do it. My concern is more with the ultra-processed food. So you get a lot of food manufacturers sticking vegan and vegetarian on a packaged food, and that gives the impression of health. And I think the terms have been used interchangeably. So you can get an ultra-processed food, for example, like a fake burger, so you've got a lot of these replacement meats now. So not just a veggie burger, but, something that's supposed to taste a little bit more like meat. What are the ingredients in those, and what's happened in the processing? So my word of caution is vegan or vegetarian doesn't, unfortunately, in today's supermarkets, doesn't mean healthy all the time.
No. Having worked in the wholesale sector, one of our suppliers who was providing gluten-free products said to us, he said, don't look at the sugar content on the back of the pack. And I said, why is that? He says, well, the rule is if you take something out, something has to go back in to replace it. He says, so whilst they're gluten-free, they've got 2 or 3 times the amount of sugar in there. And you go, oh, so people are eating that because they believe that the gluten-free is going to be better for their gut and for their health. And yet actually they've just doubled their sugar intake as a result of that. And so you have to, there's almost too much information about nowadays, but it's all about clever marketing, isn't it? You have to really start reading past the adverts and past the branding and start getting down to the root, for lack of a better term, the root of what's actually in the product, hey?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just they've not just added sugar and salt to these things, but they've stripped out the fiber. So we're talking about those fibers to feed the gut bacteria. And they've often stripped out, good protein. So fiber and protein is what makes us feel full. So a lot of these packaged foods can leave us feeling more hungry. than otherwise. So it's not just the impact of the ingredients, but there's a whole other layer going on about, well, how does that make us feel afterwards?
Yeah, that's I mean, I haven't really looked. I don't really subscribe to diets and to the fads. I feel like, I mean, like for example, at the moment, I'm gaining weight because I'm experiencing high levels of stress. I'm eating more carbs. Back end of last year, I was using alcohol as a self-soothing mechanism, and self-care had gone out the window, so I wasn't exercising. So rather than put myself on a diet, I've started exercising, which isn't good just for my physical health and my waistline, but it also makes me feel a lot better as well. So I don't tend to subscribe to diets or fads. I tend to look at it from a very high up position in terms of, I'm not burning enough, I need to burn more, or I need to eat less. But there needs to be that equilibrium, doesn't there, between burning calories and eating calories. And no matter how you dress that up, sometimes on a very high macro level, that's what it comes down to in terms of weight loss. But there's all those nuances, such as what you eat and how you exercise and what sort of like structures you have in place that actually make you feel good and make you feel wholesome. But I mean, whilst we're on the subject, I mean, why do I? He says, looking at a 2.5 kilo bag of chocolate that a supplier very kindly donated. Why do I crave copious amounts of sugar and carbs and chocolate when we are stressed or when it has been a long day? Why is that our go-to soothing mechanism?
Yeah, great question, Chris. Thanks. It goes back to our evolution. So the body doesn't distinguish between psychological stress, so, a boss shouting at you, versus the physical stress of running away from an animal on the savannah all those, thousands of years ago. To the body and the brain, it's the same thing. So if you think you've got to get ready to run from danger, your body needs energy. It needs to be primed. It needs sugar and glucose to be in those limbs ready to run. So it's the same with psychological stress. We crave the sugar and the carbohydrates because the body thinks it needs some quick releasing energy to run away. And that's simply what it is. And the cortisol, the hormone cortisol, goes and pumps it into our body for us.
Oh, so it's like what used to be a self-protection mechanism is now a self-sabotaging mechanism, because we don't necessarily need those carbs or energy, because we're stressed, and we ultimately self-care has probably gone out the window as well. So exercise is probably not something that we're using to burn that off. So what do we do instead? Like, how do we get through that if that's biologically a mechanism that we've got in place?
It comes back to that relaxation and finding ways to bring balance to our nervous system. Because if you are in that stressed state, then it's going to make weight loss very difficult, because what cortisol also does is that it raises our insulin levels. So insulin is a hormone that our pancreas releases when we eat. It senses the food coming through our bloodstream, and then it gives us insulin to take it all around the body. But high levels of insulin, say by constant grazing, so if we're snacking a lot and eating all day, then our insulin's never going to go down, then that's going to prevent any kind of fat burning of our existing stores. So one way of trying to manage our weight is to manage our insulin levels. So I don't have any quick fix for you. We can't change our evolution, but the other important factor is our food environment. So, all those years ago, food wasn't abundant, and this is where intermittent fasting comes in, because the body sometimes would have lots of food and sometimes it wouldn't. Whereas now food is everywhere, we can't escape it. And that's one of the fundamental problems with society, is that the junk food and the nice tasting food that hijacks our brain is all around us.
Yes, a life of abundance isn't necessarily a good thing. And again, it comes down to intrinsic and extrinsic motivations, which I talk about a lot on the podcast. But I mean, what sort of links are there? I mean, we know, through general conversations, especially within the hospitality community, where, often enough, not eating full meals, haven't got time for it. It's a, plate of chips on the pass, or a bowl of pasta or leftover pasta for staff food. We also know that 8 out of 10 or 4 out of 5 individuals within hospitality experience difficulties with their mental health and high levels of stress. So what sort of evidence is there that's linked specifically food to depression, and how big a role has that got to play in our overall well-being?
I'd say it's a tool in the toolbox for sure. But the problem that nutrition has had until recently is that it's very difficult for gold standard, what we call randomized controlled trials, is the sort of highest standard of evidence to show cause and effect. It's very difficult with with nutrition and food, because we can't lock people up to monitor what they're eating in a trial. That's not ethical. So we then rely on food questionnaires or food recall, which has an element of mistakes in them, that people don't always recall exactly what they've eaten, or they might miss things out. So that is a form of research is already limited. But then how do you isolate a food or a nutrient like you would with a drug? So with a drug trial, you generally have a control trial, so a placebo, when you give them a sugar pill and they don't know that they're taking a placebo, versus the group that are getting the intervention, and then you compare the two, and then you can demonstrate efficacy of that drug. But you can't do that with nutrition, because you can't isolate the nutrient or the food, or be sure that people are on, they're eating lots of different nutrients in a day. So nutrition's already on the back foot in terms of the gold standard evidence that people expect. However, there has been a fantastic trial called the SMILES trial that went on in Australia. And this lady is doing some wonderful work. She's called Felice Jacka. And what she did was she had 180 people with clinical depression, so, major depression. And she put half of the group on a Mediterranean diet. So that's a little bit of meat and fish, fruit and vegetables, nuts and seeds, olive oil. So the Mediterranean diet is kind of like it's the most well-known healthy way of eating. So the intervention group went on the Mediterranean diet with support, some health coaching. And then the other part went on just had coaching, they had that sort of group support. And so they went on this for 12 weeks. And any medication, so if they were on antidepressants, they carried on with those. And what they found was, with the Mediterranean diet, that 1/3 of participants went into remission. So their depression completely stopped, versus 8% in the support group. Now, that might not sound a lot, but by drug standards, that would be like an amazing result. So that is just one example where there are trials now which show that food makes a huge impact on our mind. And there are also what we call longitudinal studies, where they look at diet overall over a number of years, over a much bigger cohort, and they have shown associations. So they can't say X nutrient has this effect, but they can say that Mediterranean diet, healthy eating index, DASH diet, which is all about blood pressure. So there's various different diets that they've looked at, and they're all associated with lower depression.
Interesting. As they say, what's the old saying? You are what you eat. I think that's never been so true. And so for anyone who's looking at changing their diet, which often enough, getting the energy and the forward momentum to change any habitual process is the hardest part, and putting one foot in front of the other. But can you suggest any simple steps or tips that people can take to start to address this, especially if they don't have much time at home, if they're not able to do a great deal of meal prep? What sort of things can they do to start to look after this area of their life?
Yeah, I mean, I'm all about practicality, and it is really tough. And that's why I like to start with the mind, because if we're not motivated or we're low mood, then nothing else is going to change. So let's try and, physically and mentally support the brain, and then motivation may follow. The top nutrients and foods that are not difficult, they're freely abundant and cheap, because there's also this misconception that healthy food has to be expensive, which it doesn't. So the kind of three main foods which are easy to incorporate are oily fish. So grab a tin of sardines, put that in your bowl of pasta. If you're boiling some pasta with some tomato sauce, just throw in some sardines. Olive oil on liberal. Don't be afraid of fat. Our brain is made of fat and we're not eating enough of it. So either for cooking or for salad dressings. So olive oil is amazing. Green vegetables. So kale, broccoli, spinach, asparagus, Brussels sprouts. Just think anything green. It's full of folate. So B9, which is really important for our brain cells. And magnesium-rich foods, so things like almonds and pumpkin seeds. So if you're having porridge in the morning, buy a bag of mixed seeds and just put a tablespoon of those on, or a tablespoon on your salad. So a bag of mixed seeds is easy enough to get. It's cheap, but they're full of good oils and vitamins and minerals to support the brain.
Amazing, thank you. And there, I know that we have these items in our larders, and often enough we're not able to use them because they're for the customers and not for us. But again, these are important things. And to be honest, you can shop anywhere in whatever country you're in, and there's usually Whole Food shops, or there's Lidl's or Aldi's around the world nowadays as well that do these in abundance, don't they? That literally no frills seeds and options. I mean, chia seeds fall into that as well, because I've heard chia seeds and amaranth seeds have quite a high benefit to people's digestion and health.
Chia seeds are full of fiber, so yeah, they're really good for the gut, and they are also a vegetarian source of omega-3. So when I mentioned oily fish, if you're vegetarian, then the chia seeds would be a nice alternative to get that omega-3 good fat. But it does have to go through an extra conversion process in the body. So that then, how good are you at converting? How much are you getting the benefit? So fish is better in that it's more freely available to the body, but chia seeds would be an alternative.
I don't eat a great deal of fish at all, so that's something I'll have to definitely start to try and address. And I mean, you said it doesn't need to be too expensive. I take it. Are we solely going to live off of sort of seeds and plants with lashings of olive oil, or are we able to use carbs? Are we able to eat carbs and consume carbs, or do we have to limit our intake for those?
No, it's all about whether they are, it's about the type of carbs. So, I'm not advocating, it's all about that broad spectrum. So things like your whole grain bread, so go for brown and wholemeal bread and pasta, brown rice, quinoa. It's not going for the white versions which spike the insulin, which cause a bit of a blood sugar roller coaster. So we can get that nice sugar rush, like from savory foods. So our white refined foods, anything white flour based, can give the brain still a sugar rush like sweet foods, but it gives us the crash as well. So that's when we can get tired and irritable and hungry and feel like we need to snack. So keeping a nice stable blood sugar by having the whole grain versions of carbohydrates is the way to go.
Again, I'm thinking mid-service, 2 minutes of mindfulness with the right level of nutrients in order to get your body fit and ready for round two, as opposed to pushing on through without any breaks, having a Red Bull to give you a bit of caffeine and a bit of sugar, which then ultimately then you crash and you crave more because you're stressed, and then the cycle repeats. I can see a way through the fog. I have no idea how to get there. So, Julie, I take it that's where you come in, and what sort of services do you offer from Vegas Wellbeing's point of view? How do you work with your clients?
So I work with individuals and businesses and charities. It really upsets me that I offer a private service that isn't covered by insurance or the NHS, and not enough people know about us. So on an individual basis, I work in packages. So one-off appointments doesn't achieve anything for either me or the client. I don't know what's worked for them. You don't get feedback. So generally a 6 or 12-week package to look at their lifestyle, their diet, and what incremental changes we can make. There's nothing, I would never ask anyone to make things which are too difficult. It's all about doing things in a slow and steady way. So it's quite the opposite to a lot of the common marketing that we're bombarded with about transformations, lose weight quickly. Not that it's all about weight loss at all. It's all about feeling better. But it's that slow and steady approach and identifying your triggers, your barriers to change, your motivations, so that it's sustainable for the long run. And on the business side, it's very much more education. So educating people on maybe diseases or how they can look after themselves to avoid getting diseases. So 40% of chronic disease, so heart attacks, diabetes, strokes, Alzheimer's, they're all related to our lifestyle. So let's avoid getting there in the first place. But there could be workshops, food tastings, bring some fun back to learning. Food is such a community-based, or it should be, community-based activity where let's use food to communicate again and learn as we do it. So, it's flexible, but love to work with charities as well to educate people who can't afford my services on how to look after themselves.
My brain's thinking at this moment in time in terms of potentially doing some sort of collabs whereby we can invite people from the hospitality community to come and dine in a not necessarily Mediterranean setting, but with a Mediterranean principle, because one of the key things from that study, if I remember correctly, was the fact that people dine together as a community, as a large family, and that sense of connection was also one of the things that could be attributed to improving health and well-being from a mental standpoint of view. But, I think there's definitely, with the hundreds of hospitality professionals and culinary geniuses we have listening to this right now, I think there's options whereby we can put on some really cool events that educate people and get them engaged in nutrition and what they're eating. So we can talk about that offline, Julie. But if people needed to wanted to find you, there will be notes in the show notes. But where can people find you?
Yes, so my website is vegaswellbeing.co.uk, and if you sign up to my newsletter, there you get a free 3-day recipe book, which is all for the brain and to support anxiety and nutrition. So simple, easy recipes. So I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Just Vegas. It's all Vegas Wellbeing as the handle. And I offer free discovery calls. So if anyone wants to chat with me, no pressure, no obligation, you can book in a free call as well, no problem.
Perfect. Thank you. And I look forward to continuing this conversation offline. But thank you very much for joining me today and talking about sort of your business model and really filling us in on the importance of nutrition and well-being. And thanks for your time.
You're most welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks again for listening to another episode of the Burnt Chef Journal. If you haven't yet checked out the Burnt Chef Project website, then please head over to www.theburnchefproject.com. You'll find a whole host of resources, free access to our training app, as well as free support services, blog posts, our merchandise store, and also our ambassadors who are there to support you when you need it. Thanks again for joining us this week, and I'll see you again soon.